What's up, Justin here with Infused Library. Benjamin Franklin is an icon of America, but if you only have a passing knowledge of his life, you might be wondering how in the world did he actually help the United States? He didn't lead troops like George Washington, and he didn't write the Declaration of Independence like Thomas Jefferson. So what does a person do to get on the $100 bill? Let's go back to the beginning, his early life, to get some perspective on his character and personality traits. He was born in 1706, grew up the youngest of 17. His father originally decided to have him trained to become a pastor, but he realized that would be kind of expensive, so instead, Josiah Franklin sent him to work for another one of his sons, James, to become a printer. Ben quickly became very good at his job, even secretly writing for a newspaper under a fake name, tricking the entire city. He was arrogant but very smart. Smarter than his older brother he worked for. And in a surprising turn of events, Ben found that it's not very fun to be an apprentice to an older brother that beats you. So Franklin ran away to Philadelphia at age 17, a large city in its day at just under 10,000. Now here's something you need to know about this young Benjamin Franklin. He was incredibly smart and outgoing, a very important combination by the way. With hardly any formal schooling, he continued to teach himself throughout his life by reading books by the dozen. Just months after arriving in Philadelphia at the age of 17, he had become friends with Pennsylvania Governor Sir William Keith. Sir William convinced him to go to London to buy printing equipment so he could start up his own print shop, and the governor would pay for it. So Franklin was convinced and sailed to London, and immediately found out that the governor had flaked on him and wasn't actually going to pay for the equipment. So Franklin had to find a job at a print shop in London, and he began to fall in love with the city. This is important for his later role in America as an ambassador. After a few years in London, he sailed back to the colonies and set up a print shop in partnership with a man called Hugh Meredith. At this time in his life, we see a bunch of different traits of Franklin start to emerge. He was a student of the Enlightenment in thought and belief. He was continually thinking of new ways to improve the city, with a library, inventions, policemen, and a fire department. There were a few things that set him on the path to influence. Step number one was he had to become wealthy. He created the first newspaper chain in the entire world, and it led him to become very rich. He was so wealthy, in fact, that he was one of the richest men in all of the colonies. This gave him the leverage to devote time to what actually made him famous later on, his experiments and writings. He invented a lot of different things we use today, but his experiments or writings about electricity were what gave him international fame. That, combined with a deep civic involvement with local and state government, positioned him to be in the thick of things later on during the Revolution. Franklin was a part of the new class of businessmen. He was strange because even though he was extremely wealthy, influential people didn't always look up to him. Sometimes they thought of him as a glorified printer boy. That was the mentality back in the 1700s. You were born into a class of people, and you stayed there. Franklin very carefully timed his entrance into the life of a gentleman. It was slow, deliberate, and he timed it very delicately. This led him to become affluent with people that might have looked down on him in other circumstances. He was the ultimate chess player. In fact, he actually loved the game of chess. Now let's fast forward to the 1750s. He was sent as a colonial agent to protest against the political influence of the Penn family. He stayed in Britain for 20 years, networking and honing the craft of diplomacy, which he would use heavily later on in his life. Now at this point, he's a rich, famous diplomat that is known for electricity and being an ambassador from America. But how did he contribute during the Revolution? Let's fast forward to the 1760s. Franklin had become the de facto diplomat from America to England. Tensions were rising between the colonies and England. Franklin's job was writing to America trying to calm America down, and meeting with the government officials in England trying to calm England down. Franklin loved England and was trying to desperately stop the revolution that was slowly going to happen. But no matter how hard he tried to explain England's position to America, and no matter how hard he was trying to explain America's position to England, there was no stopping the revolution that was slowly going to happen. Now here's the problem that happens when you represent a country that you haven't actually lived in for 20 years. You start to lose touch with the people there and what they actually think. He had been a diplomat for decades now. There were probably politicians that hadn't even met him. They had just grown up hearing about him. A series of events led Franklin to realizing that war was inevitable and that the colonies had already shifted to that mentality. He decided to sail back to America. When he arrived, he had a heck of a time convincing everyone that he was actually on the side of the colonies. The general view was that he must be an English sympathizer after living in England for 20 years, because he actually originally was an English sympathizer. He knew that some people would think of him like this, so he sharpened his rhetoric against England the moment he got off the boat, and he became a leading figure for the revolution. Now let's fast forward a few years. Franklin was sent as the American ambassador to France. This is where he did the bulk of his work for the American cause. Two things helped him while he was there. He was immensely famous, for one. People were painting his face everywhere. He actually got tired of being asked to sit for paintings. People were making statues of him, hanging his portrait on their mantles. The king was actually getting sick of how many portraits he was seeing of Franklin everywhere. The second thing that helped him was his razor-sharp diplomatic skills that he honed in Britain. These two things combined and helped him become a very, very good pick as the ambassador to France. In essence, he helped America win the war just as much as Washington because he was the one that actually got the money that funded the war. Every time America would have collapsed due to funds, Franklin was there convincing the people in France to give the wannabe United States another loan. Loan after loan after loan after loan. Now here's the funny thing about revolutions. A lot of times they're fought on other people's money. So choosing the right ambassadors to ask for the money is very, very important. If you choose the wrong ambassador that doesn't jive well with the country that you send them to, your country can literally run out of money and you will lose the war. That's why Franklin was so important. He was not the only ambassador to France, but he was the most effective one. The American public wasn't very grateful to this contribution during his lifetime, and he only gained major recognition for his war efforts after his death. That's the first reason why he was famous, because of his great work during the Revolution. But there's a second reason why he's so famous today. Franklin's autobiography and the almanacs he wrote as a printer. After his death, he was essentially reborn as this rags to riches self-help success story. You might be dirt poor now, but look at Franklin. He read all these books, worked hard, became rich, invented a dozen things, and signed the Constitution. That was a story that a lot of people told their kids as they grew up. His life story became so pervasive that even Mark Twain wrote about him in a satire piece about him ruining the life of tens of thousands of young boys with all of that early to bed, early to rise stuff. So if you're wondering why Ben Franklin is so famous, it's down to about 4 or 5 things. He became the icon he is today, and he got on the $100 bill because of his immense volumes of writings, his work during the Revolution, his inventions, his enormous influence on science, and his rags to riches story. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. This is Infused Library. I will see you guys next time.